Is there a war in this country over education? CNN thinks so, and it hosted a live town hall on that subject with our very own Governor, Glenn Youngkin. We'll share the highlights. Plus, there's a shakeup brewing in the General Assembly with an unprecedented number of legislators calling it quits. What does this mean for us? Welcome to Speak Up Virginia, equipping you to speak up on the life, family, and freedom issues that matter most to you. From the Family Foundation, I'm your host, Candy Cushman, with our president, Victoria Cobb. All right, well, before we begin today's show, I just have to share the most adorable story that Eli told me about. And I should mention that Eli is our grassroots manager. He's sitting in here. He helps us with our podcast. And he shared this story about how he and his wife met and a Chick-fil-A cookie played a key part in this whole thing. So, Eli, you want to elaborate?
Oh, yeah. So one of my first jobs in college was being a bagger at Chick-fil-A. And, well, there's this pretty girl that walks up that I'd loosely known from our college ministry. She orders her meal. It was running a little bit behind. So when I bagged her food, I slipped a little gift of a Chick-fil-A cookie in there, give her a smile, sent her on her way. She tells the story now that when she got back to her room, she shows her roommate the cookie and says, well, this boy cannot just give me a cookie and not marry me. So long story short, this cookie was the seed that ended up being our marriage.
I'm impressed that she identified, like, I would marry this boy from a cookie. Like, I think that's...
Apparently, that's like a really powerful pickup method. Chick-fil-A cookie speaks volumes.
Who knew? I mean, I'm a little worried because I have a teenager working at Chick-fil-A, and it's a girl. So I'm a little worried about how this whole story fleshes out because she's a little young for all these, pickup lines and cookies.
All right, well, diving right into the topics for today, I know we promised everybody that we were going to talk about or give you an update on what was happening with this gridlock that's going on with the General Assembly on the budget because it affects issues that we care about, things like funding for abortions and the opportunity scholarships for impoverished kids being able to afford an education that helps them. But they're still in the gridlock as far as the time that we are taping right now. I know that's a big shocker for government to still be gridlocked for an unknowable amount of time, but that's where we are. So we'll have to punt on that for now. But instead, we thought it would be good to give you highlights from this War on Education town hall that the governor did with CNN. So let's just start with some context here. Why do you think what is probably the world's largest leftist media operation, CNN, why do they want to have a conservative governor on for an entire hour? And then why did he want to participate?
Well, okay, I think there's a couple things here. We do know CNN's ratings have been struggling because they have been so far left, they're outside the mainstream. And so I think they are doing some proactive things, if you look at who they've hired and things going on right now, to try to look a little more mainstream. So this looks a little more mainstream. It's a topic that's hot everywhere. It's not just a Virginia issue. So I think, it appeals to people generally, this parents' education thing. And then there's, of course, the whole background of, is Governor Youngkin going to run for president? And so I think they think we might have a presidential contender, and that gets to why would he do it? There's a lot of benefit to get in front of a national audience if you need name ID, if you're thinking about in any way, shape, or form jumping into, especially 2024, because you don't have that much name ID built yet because you haven't been our governor very long.
Yeah. And interestingly, when Jake Tapper did ask him the presidential aspiration question, he seemed a little conflicted on it.
He always sounds like he's unsure, unclear. I think he's got to get a better answer to that one way or the other. I just think it seems a little, of course, we know you're thinking about it. So just acknowledge the obvious and then say, but I'm focused on Virginia right now. And he did get to that, but I feel like it just needs to be a little punchier because he gets asked that question like every week in every interview now.
I always feel like he's still struggling inside about it. And
I'm sure he probably is, actually, because there's not a clear path for him. There was one of his chief people actually went on a radio interview and said it's a two-man race between DeSantis and Trump, which is not ideal when it's your guy. Yeah. So then he had to backtrack and say, well, if Youngkin gets in, he's going to make his own path. So anyway, all that to say, I think he is probably struggling internally about what he's going to do.
But, another good thing about this town hall is that it speaks to the fact that Virginia is playing a key role nationwide on these education issues.
Absolutely. It puts Virginia in the spotlight, which I think it has been on these education issues. But I think it's clear that he won on that issue. And I think it's clear that issue is not resolved. It is still very much in the forefront of every parent, every everybody across America. So,
and to that point, he did not back off that parental rights messaging, right, during this town hall.
He did an excellent job of, it's almost a communication, sort of principle, repeat. And he said parents matter over and over and over again, and kept coming back to that theme. And that, I think, is what won him the election. And I think it is what will continue to make him a successful governor.
Yeah. Well, just kind of getting into the nitty gritty here, I guess it's really no surprise that they grilled him on this parent-friendly revision that he's done on the model policies concerning transgender issues in schools. And one of the most compelling moments was this exchange that he had with a student named Nico. Let's just listen to that for a minute.
Transgender model policies require that students play on the sports teams and use the restrooms that correspond with their sex assigned at birth. Look at me. I am a transgender man. Do you really think that the girls in my high school would feel comfortable sharing a restroom with me?
So first of all, Nico, thank you for, again, asking the question and being here tonight and engaging in this important discussion. I believe first, when parents are engaged with their children, then you can make good decisions together. And I met your dad, and I'm glad that you're both here together. That's really, really important. I also think that there are lots of students involved in this decision. And what's most important is that we try very hard to accommodate students. That's why I have said many, many times, we just need extra bathrooms in schools. We need gender-neutral bathrooms, and so people can use a bathroom that they, in fact, are comfortable with. I think sports are very clear, and I don't think it's controversial. I don't think that biological boys should be playing sports with biological girls. There's been decades of efforts in order to gain opportunities for women in sports, and it's just not fair.
All right, Victoria, what did you think of the governor's response, about, well, we can just have extra bathrooms, gender-neutral options?
Well, I really do think it's a hard situation. And I think the left always thinks that we believe certain things, but if we actually, you ever hear anybody say, if you actually had a transgender person in your family, you'd feel differently. If you actually meet a transgender, I think they literally thought if there's somebody there face to face, somehow he's not going to hold the same policy. So I respected the fact that he stood by his gun, said this is why we're doing it, and he went on to say, look, this is a matter of, and I've always said that to some degree, it's a matter of cost. If bathrooms all had individualized Starbucks-like bathrooms where it's male or female, but you close and lock the door and you can wash your hands, and we wouldn't have this issue. And I think that's what he was trying to get at, is that there are ways to solve this that do respect everyone and respect privacy rights for all. I think he could have talked a little more about the rights of the kids that are also in that bathroom that have to change and be exposed. I think he missed a moment where he could have really put up an exclamation point on it by saying, look, there are girls there that don't want to undress in front of a biological boy.
Rights.
Yeah.
Well, getting into the area on female rights, I was encouraged by the strength of his response on the issue of protecting female sports. What were your thoughts on that?
I love that he just kept saying it's not controversial. I mean, we know there are people that disagree, but I would agree. Our polling in Virginia looks like it's 70% say, look, this is something that should be common sense. There are biological differences, and he outlined that. He just said, look, there are biological differences, and I don't think a biological girl should play on a team where she has to compete against a biological boy. I thought he was clear. I thought that was one of his strongest points of the evening.
Yeah, I said this shouldn't even be controversial.
Right.
It's that much common sense.
It's common sense, and I think most parents, particularly parents of girls, where they might be losing scholarships, opportunities, championships to a boy, I think many parents can relate to, why is this even a conversation point?
Well, we weren't surprised when Jake Tapper continued to grill down even more.
This was where they asked the most follow-up questions, these issues, I noticed.
Yeah, and one of Jake's follow-up questions was, well, what about when families disagree on this? How are you going to accommodate all families? What did you think about how he navigated that?
Yeah, that's a tough question. He's making it sound like, well, if you believe in parents' rights, well, parents' rights don't always agree. And I thought Governor Youngkin was clear that there are some principles. I mean, he didn't directly say that way, but he's saying, look, this is about fairness and competition. But he also, in one of those questions, I don't know if this is the point at which you're referring, but he also brings up the fact of Sage's story in the whole interview, and basically, and we've talked about Sage's law on this podcast before, but he basically says, look, you may have your rights as a transgender individual, but there's also parents that have been on the other side of this that haven't had their rights respected. So he was able to bring in her story to say, there are two sides to this coin. Let's not only focus on one side of this.
Yeah, he said, let's talk about the other side, which of course CNN and corporate media, they rarely, if ever, do the other side. So it was great that he had Sage's grandmother sitting right there in the audience.
Yes. And I noticed later the camera went back to her and she was agreeing with him on
Yeah.
another point, which I thought was just great, that she was there. I think she's been so brave to share her story that I think it's wonderful that her story was able to be a part of a national platform there.
Well, let's just listen to a clip for a moment of the governor responding on that particular point.
The other side of not being told what was going on in their child's life. And I believe that Sage's grandmother is here tonight.
She's over there.
And hi. And of course, what happened in Sage's life was that counselors and teachers didn't tell Sage's family about the fact that she was transgender. And she got caught up in some horrific human trafficking issues, and they almost lost her. And they didn't know. See, there's a basic rule here, which is that children belong to parents, not to the state, not to schools, not to bureaucrats, but to parents.
I think it's fantastic that he made the point that kids do not belong to the state, that they are fundamentally in the control of their parents and parents need to be in the loop. And he just kept emphasizing that over and over. And I think that goes a long way with most people.
Yes, another interesting moment was when Jake Tapper asked him about this situation going on in Fairfax County where a lot of schools actually withheld awarding academic merit certificates to kids. This can affect their scholarship, their ability to apply for scholarships. So I thought that was really interesting how he navigated that. Let's just listen to a clip of his response.
But of course, what was suggested and communicated by senior officials in schools was exactly that they had held back notifying students of their national merit commendation because they didn't want other students to feel bad. And this was more than just one case. Next thing you know, we have over 16 or 17 schools across one school district that this was happening in. The reality is that when a school hires consultants to come in and teach equity for all students, equal outcomes for all students at any cost, we end up with these kinds of circumstances. We have to celebrate excellence. We shouldn't embrace equity at the expense of excellence.
Yeah, I loved the passion that he gave to this issue. I mean, we know he cares about it because he asked the Attorney General to look into it. And I think it's great that he's showing that it matters. I also like when he talks about education, and he said this at one point, I don't remember if it's tied to this moment, but he talked about we're not just trying to raise the ceiling, but we're also trying to raise the floor. So what he's saying is we want to allow people who can soar to soar to their highest heights, but we also want the bottom to come up. Our standards need to get better. And I think he does a good job when he says things like that, saying, look, we're paying attention to everybody, but there are kids who are going to soar. They're going to bump into that ceiling. They're reaching the highest heights. And these kids deserve that knowledge that they had done so well.
Yeah, he was really strong just on the whole issue of critical race theory, equity, and just saying these things should not be done at the expense of excellence in our schools. So
and you remember he referenced white privilege bingo out of Fairfax. I think we've hit that on this podcast before. What
I can't remember. Loudon. It was just in the Nova area.
My child was watching with me, and he said, "What is white privilege bingo?" So I had to tell him this ridiculous game. But yeah. I think that deserves a mention. How ridiculous that is.
Well, was there anything else that stood out to you while you were watching this?
Well, I think he got some tough questions on Pledge of Allegiance, and I thought he stood strong on, look, that we should be proud of our country. He got a hard question on gun control, and he got back to the mental health issues that drive behind. I mean, we've had some terrible things happen in classrooms. I thought the most important thing is that he treated every questioner with kindness, and that's really a hallmark of Governor Youngkin. He applauded the teachers for serving. He was proud of the kids for asking their questions, even though they obviously weren't coming from the same angle. So I think that was a favorable overall impression.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us for this week's Speak Up Virginia. We're so glad you're with us. And don't forget, if you want to learn more about what we're talking about, to check us out on the website, familyfoundation.org. And make sure that you share our podcast with your friends and give us a review if you like what you're hearing. See you next time. And don't forget, we are stronger when we speak together.